In this video, we're going to be looking at how I went from my original foam core design for oceans to this 3D printed insert. If you open this video just to learn about the final product, skip to this timestamp here. This originally started as a design to accommodate the base game with only some deluxe components. Starting at the bottom, space was allocated for all the surface cards as well as the deep cards that include several but not all of the deep card promo packs. In the corner, I've slotted the Cambrian explosion card as well as player reference cards that I wrote. Next up are the fish tokens. These 3 containers are meant to sort the fishes for 2-player games, 3 and 4 players in another, and the reserve tokens in a 3rd container. These containers cannot accommodate the acrylic fish tokens that are part of the deluxe package, but that's what the improved design addresses, which you'll see later in the video. Moving on up to the scenario cards, the sides have a notch to grab the cards more easily. Next to that are the starting bonus tokens. I don't have the 5 to 6 player expansion, but including the extra tokens would just be a matter of cutting out a little bit of extra space. Now here's where I started running into space limitation. I purchased the Legends and the Solo Mode expansions after making this insert, so I've had to find places to put things. For the player sacs, I've had to fold them and place them in the ocean tray. It does the job, but I wanted to do more than just cramming them in wherever there's room. Underneath all this is where the reef tray is, which you can barely see. All the Solo Mode components and Legends cards are stored here for now. It's rather inconvenient that I have to take out these components that may not be used all the time before being able to reach the reef tray that I do have to use each time I play. And lastly, the population boards. They're out of the way, but still easy to grab. So that's what I had come up with for the foam core design. It's a good start, it accommodates sleeved cards, but I found a better way to organize everything. So let's clear this out and make our way to that. It feels like a waste to throw this out as it's still good for use. I may just list this somewhere for anyone who has just the base game with a few deluxe components. If anyone wants this, let me know. Also, tangent before getting to the main insert, it's worth bringing up the reef and oceans tray separately. My design replaces the original cardboard components with good reasons. First, size comparison. The cardboard uses locking joints to stay together, which means the ends that stick out are dead space. It takes up room in the box and doesn't add any available volume of fish it can hold. I've made one that copies most of its dimensions, leaving out the extruded ends. This prompted the questions of, does it have to be this big? Does it have to be this wide? Does it have to be this long? In some sense, yes. Slots 1 and 2 need to be a certain width to fit the scenario cards. Now with Ocean Zone 3, however, in my experience of playing the game, it doesn't need to be the size that it is to function. And the biggest gripe I had with this tray is picking up the fish tokens themselves, something you have to do very, very frequently. Because you're grabbing from a scattered group of fish rather than a pile of it, oftentimes you're picking up fish one piece at a time, which is a rather slow process. It's even worse if trying to pick up the cardboard tokens. What I always wanted was a way to pull pieces out more smoothly, sort of like taking change out of a cash register tray. So I did just that. The ends on all the zones are curved, which allows me to take a bunch of fish in one grab, like so. The slot for the scenario cards are sized bigger in case you happen to get larger sleeves. Now it may look like the surface area is smaller than the card itself. This was done intentionally to give you just a tiny bit easier time picking up the card, as there is room for your finger underneath to grip it. I wouldn't say this provides a massive improvement in user experience, but I thought I'd give it a try and save a little bit of filament in the process. Moving on, let's talk about the reef tray. It's square shaped, it's colorful, it very much looks like it's meant to hold stuff inside. I think it was made this size for those who wanted to play the reef variant that excludes the ocean tray, so making it this big was great for table presence. However, I've always noticed how the tray was way bigger than it needed to be. Even if you were to do a 6-player game with just the reef variant, there would still be a lot of extra room in this tray. And again, the absence of a curved edge like before meant picking up tokens was a tedious task. So I've sized it down by about 30% of the original size. The reef tray was done in this dark turquoise filament so that thematically the ocean can be the dark blue color, whereas everything else, which you'll see in the main insert, will just be the same turquoise color. Now onto that main insert. Because the standard board game box exceeds the size of the 3D printer's bed, they've been divided up into different pieces which you can put together. With these two parts here, I've had to come up with a way to keep them held together. So I'm using these narrow triangular bits to hold itself in place. These go into the slots on the other piece like shown. Now keep in mind they don't lock into place with friction alone. If you want these connections to hold permanently, you can apply a small amount of glue, hot glue, epoxy, whatever you got, into that slot and press the two parts together. This part holds the Legends cards. This part holds the scenario cards. Now, I didn't make the same triangular bit like before, that would have helped holding this piece in place, but you could apply adhesives like mentioned earlier, or you could even reposition this if you so wish. So this is the main insert, and I'd like to talk about what we have here. So if you recall in the foam core design, the solo mode components were all up in the reef tray's space, and I wanted to have them separated. The reef is a mandatory component when playing this game, and the solo is not. I think it would be a fair assumption to say the average board gamer doesn't play solo modes as often as they play the regular multiplayer mode in most of their games. So what I think is important here in terms of organizing is keeping the solo mode parts at the bottom of the insert, where it's accessed last after everything else is taken out for setup. So what solo mode components are included with this game? Well, there's the two boards, there's a little tiny board, and 5 tiny bags. So why did I go this direction? Several reasons. Notice how the floor doesn't span the width of the area? The reason for having only a portion of the base is because I can push down one end of the board. If I do that, it lifts up the other end, making it easier to get a finger underneath to pick them up. If you've ever had to pick up a card off a smooth surface, you know why this is useful. Second reason. I never want to settle on storage containers where I need to put pieces back in a specific orientation, in a specific order, for all the pieces to fit. That takes time for cleanup and requires you to remember how to put the components back in. I wouldn't want you to remember how to do that. Instead, I'd rather you remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for future projects in store. In any case, the less effort required to return things to the box, the better. Moving on, the reef tray drops into place like so, acting as spill coverage for the components underneath. The reef tray does sit flush with this floor surface here, which you'll see why that's important later. The Legends cards go here. Again, being an optional component, it should sit at the bottom to leave space for mandatory components above. You may have noticed these are sleeved. These ones are the Gamegenic Dixit Matte, for those wondering. So the deck is larger in all dimensions, and that's been accommodated here. You'll notice these circular notches are there to get your finger around the cards. Same as we saw with the solo mode, we've got a partial floor again, so that we can push down on one end to lift up the other end of the cards in a single go, like so. Next, the population boards. I'm sure you can tell where those are supposed to go. When placed here, the Legends deck is held down by the population boards. The population boards are held down by the ocean board. The ocean board holds down everything we've seen so far. The box lid holds that in place, so nothing here will spill. Scenario cards. I've made the slot larger than the foam core version because it's important to me that you aren't fidgeting forever to get cards lined up perfectly. We're just storing cards. Precision fit is not vital. We want it to be hassle-free. Here is where the bonus tokens go. This has been sized to fit all bonus tokens, including the 5 to 6 player expansion, so those who own a copy of the Deluxe Edition are covered. So here's a container, and here's another container. They are the same size, with engraved letters distinguishing surface and deep cards apart. From what I counted, there are more surface cards than deep cards, at least with what I have on me, but that hasn't presented a huge issue fitting the cards in place. As for the sleeves, these are the Riker matte sleeves, thick just like other premium brands. Something important to note is that the Deluxe Edition sleeves that come with Oceans are much longer than these, and they will not fit in these containers. These two decks go in the corner as shown. There are notches cut out from the wall so you can get your fingers around it. Why didn't I just stick with what I had earlier in the foam core design, you may be wondering? While it does seem like I added an extra step of taking out a container and then taking the cards out of that container, the reality of lifting the stack of cards out of the box with little room to get a deep grip on the cards often resulted in the cards slipping out of my hands. I find doing it this way gives me a tidy deck out of the box every single time. So what's in this empty space, you're wondering? Let me walk you through what went down. Originally, it was to hold all the fish tokens. So as a reminder, in the base game, there was a bunch of fish tokens in one color that was what you start with for a 2-player game. If you wanted to add a 3rd player, you would add in 20 fish of any one color. And for 4 players, you would add another 20. That's all the base game had, and this was easy to work with. Space was not an issue, even with the deluxe acrylic tokens. Cardboard tokens are even less of an issue since they are flatter in shape. So what I've come up with was pre-sorting the pieces in advance while getting away from using resealable bags. So if, say, I wanted to set up for a 3-player game, all I would need are these 2 containers. The same process goes for a 4, 5, and a 6-player game. To get these into the box, you can start by placing the main container and then pinching the 2 smaller containers side by side, place that next to the big container, and then placing the last 2 containers on top of those. Despite the extra wiggle room, none of the containers slide apart enough to cause spillage. The upper lip of the containers are flush to the insert's top surface, all of which will be covered by the rulebook anyway. Now while I was doing this, I actually failed to do something, and that is I forgot about the reserve tokens. Where are these supposed to go now? Well, if I tilt the main container to the side, you will notice just how tall this container really is. And that's when I noticed all the unused space by the fish tokens inside, as noted by the piece of tape you see there. At the time, it looked like the space above was enough to store these reserve tokens. So doing a bit of math, if I widen the opening of the container and cut down on its overall height, I may be able to still pull something off here. However, this would also mean I'd have to shrink the length of the smaller containers. So taking a look to see if I'd still have adequate room for them, I can see there was unused space in each of the smaller containers. So I should be able to shrink these guys down to this size, about 1 centimeter shorter, but kept all the other dimensions the same. That centimeter can now be added to the big container. After doing that and basically splitting it in half, I now have these 2 containers. When stacked and put next to each other, you can see they match in height more or less. Each of these containers have a foot shaped to match the contour of the lip when they stack so that they don't slide around when one sits on top of the other. So now we can put all the tokens in this area now, and we'll move the old containers off to the side. With that out of the way, the Cambrian explosion. I don't see a need to make a dedicated space for a single card. You could just throw it on the Ocean Zone 1, or you could slide it in the deck somewhere. Now here's the fun part. We've got what looks like a half pipe that's going on. That is so that we can do this. Saw what happened? I just tossed them in. Very little effort required. Yes, you can argue that you can fold fabric into a smaller thing and then take up less space, but why is that necessary? I managed to fit everything else in this game somewhere and still had a lot of leftover room to allocate for these. Just trying to keep it hassle-free here. So you may be wondering, what about the player screens that come with the base game? Now, truth be told, I put those away when I bought the player sacs long before I made the foam core insert you saw earlier, so I never once considered it when designing this. That being said though, those are made of folded paper, and if that's what you're using in your copy, they could just go on top of everything here, like the rulebook. Now it's just a matter of stacking all the paper on top, like your player reference sheets and everything else that came with the game. On goes the lid, and that's how my insert comes together. If you want to purchase a copy of this insert for yourself, the links are below. If you like the work I do and want to see an insert made for a game you own, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Please consider subscribing to be updated on future products, and thanks for watching.